Welcome back to Law&Crime Live, everybody. So we were just playing you Linda Jackson. She was the person, her and her husband were living with George Burch at the time. And we are covering the George Burch case, a man who was charged with first-degree intentional homicide in the connection with the death of a 31-year-old mother out of Wisconsin. And the reason we're talking about all of this is because we believe that George Burch will take the stand today. That's right. This is huge. When a defendant takes the stand, everybody watches, and I hope everybody is watching here on Law&Crime Live. I want to bring in Law&Crime trial analyst and fellow host here on the network, Amy Dash. Amy, good to see you.
Thank you. Great to see you, Jesse.
So as we anticipate George Burch taking the stand, you've seen a lot of defendants take the stand. What pitfalls does he have to avoid?
Well, first of all, I think it's a good idea when a defendant takes the stand, usually, just because if they say that they are innocent, then why wouldn't they take the stand if they have nothing to hide? And I think that jurors can sympathize with the defendant when they see their human emotions, they see their expressions, rather than them being sort of like a faceless person over there that they can't humanize the person, especially when the death penalty is on the table. In cases like that, I think it's a good idea for the defendant. Now in terms of pitfalls, though, Jesse, just to answer your question, he has to stay consistent. That's the number one thing. His story has to match up with what he said all along.
Especially under cross-examination by the state, right?
Absolutely.
One of the things that I always love is you never really hear from the defendant. Small thing, I love hearing their voice. You never know what they sound like until they actually come there, and I think that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, but I think that's why so many attorneys are sometimes hesitant to put somebody on the stand, because if they don't sound good, if they're not a charming person, if they're not somebody that they feel can win over the jurors, or quite the opposite, but they're stoic, or they're just somebody that people can't relate with, then it can go bad for them, even if they are innocent.
I mean, it would be great if he goes on the stand and goes, "Hi, I'm George Burch," and you would not be expecting a man with a ponytail. But okay,
but you know why? I mean, they have to put him on the stand because their whole theory is predicated on the fact that he's saying that the boyfriend of Nicole Vanderheyden, Doug Dietrich, put him up to dumping the body, and that he's the one that killed her.
Amy, let's
so
talk
he's
about
got to go on, because otherwise they can't introduce that theory.
That is a story that I have heard. That is a story that it's an elaborate story, talking about that he slept with Nicole outside of her house. He was knocked unconscious by Douglas Dietrich. When he woke up, Nicole was dead, and Douglas Dietrich forced him at gunpoint to get rid of the body. Now, as far as we can tell, there were no injuries to his head. We heard that from some witnesses. The Fitbit data that was brought into evidence yesterday showed Douglas Dietrich was inactive from the period of 3 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. Maybe he took 12 steps. The Fitbit data really doesn't corroborate the defense's theory that this is a guy who killed someone, was moving someone around.
Yeah, but how do we know he had it on? That's my problem with the Fitbit.
Oh, because they were tracking tracking it yesterday,
right?
And they were able to track his movements. We know that he had it on. Now, you could say maybe he took it off.
That's what I'm saying. But when there's no movement, he could have taken it off. We don't know if he's telling the truth.
But we know that he took 12 steps at around 4 a.m. So you're saying a guy would take his Fitbit off, put it back on. Why didn't he just take it off the whole time if he knew he was going to kill her?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Also, to your other point of there not being any injuries, there were no injuries on either of the men, but there were defensive wound injuries on the victim. I find that very bizarre.
Well, as we talk about this, we have an update. This is a report from the court. Defense attorney says that Burch might say he was afraid to go to the police about what happened because he was on probation. Now, the defense is making sure the state can't cross-examine him on his past convictions. What do you think about that?
The fact that he was scared because he was on probation, I think that, I mean, obviously he was scared because we know that there's evidence that he was doing searches, computer searches, to see updates on the investigation. But I don't know if he was scared because he actually did it, or he was scared because he's saying Doug Dietrich put him up to it, and then, like you're saying, he just was hesitant to go to the police. I think if you have nothing to hide, even if you're on probation, you go, you tell the truth right away when it happens.
We know from many witnesses, people that he lived with at the time, they said nothing was unusual about his behavior after this happened. In fact, Ed Jackson said that when the news reports of Nicole came on and he was staring at the screen, I said, I hope they get the guy that did this. George Burch was just staring at the television screen and didn't say a word.
That's unusual. Either way you slice it, that's unusual. If he killed her, that's really cold and psychopathic. If Doug Dietrich put him up to dumping the body, and he still has no reaction when Ed Jackson says, I hope the man's held responsible, and he's got no reaction, and he was involved in some sort of cover-up, it's still bizarre to have no reaction.
Well, we're trying to understand the personality of George Burch, and the best way to do that is see how he does on the stand, which is what we are going to be covering today. We believe he will take the stand today, any moment. After we come back from our break, we're going to make sure to show that. And this is a big day, ladies and gentlemen, for anybody who's following this case, because as Jamie was talking about, the defendant going on the stand can either be a good thing or it can be a bad thing, especially for the defense. Again, we will cover this case in its entirety as we come back. We are live back in the Wisconsin courtroom. You're not going to want to miss anything. We're going to go to a short break, and when we come back, hopefully George Burch will be on the stand. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. And speaking of live, we are live in the Wisconsin courtroom for George Burch. This is the murder case of Nicole Vanderheiden. Now, George Burch is the defendant. He's on trial for her murder, but he is saying that he didn't do it, that it was Douglas Dietrich, Nicole's boyfriend. Now, the reason we're talking about this is because we anticipate George Burch will take the stand today and very soon. The judge is working on some issues with the attorneys right now, and as soon as we have a feed, we're going to make sure to go to it. What I want to play for you right now, though, is the testimony of George Burch's ex-girlfriend. We talk about George Burch and what he's like. This is his ex-girlfriend. She knew him better than most people. She testified earlier in the week. Let's listen in.
But you actually were with him on a pretty daily basis throughout a week?
Yes.
Did you know where he was living?
Yes.
Where was he living?
He was living with Ed and Linda over off of Broadway, kind of. I forgot what street it was on.
Okay. And was that the Jacksons?
Yes.
Did you ever go to that home?
Yes.
And you got to meet the Jacksons?
Correct.
Did he ever come to your home?
No.
Was that on Greenwood Avenue, if you recall, his residence with the Jacksons?
I think so, yeah.
Did you consider yourself being in a close relationship with Mr. Burch?
I thought so, yes.
Do you remember there being a time that Mr. Burch told you that he was going to go on a fishing trip?
Yes.
Did you know with whom he was going?
With Ed and like another boy, I think, or something.
Okay. Were they heading down to Racine?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Did you go with him?
No.
Do you know if Linda was going with?
No, Linda was not going with.
Okay. And do you remember, was that a weekend trip they were going to take?
If I remember correctly, yes.
Okay. Did you, on the Friday before he was leaving, did you see him on that occasion?
We were talking, and I'm pretty sure I hung out with him in like the morning.
But not the evening, is that correct?
No.
I'm sorry, I put that badly. Were you with him in the evening on that Friday?
No, not the evening.
Okay, and you would expected him to be gone that weekend, is that correct?
Correct.
While he was gone, did you find out, did he in fact go fishing? Did you see any pictures or anything?
Yes, he sent me a picture to my phone of him catching the fish.
Okay. And was that something that he would normally do, keep track of what he was doing and send you pictures sometimes?
Yes.
Did you see him when he returned after the fishing trip?
Yes.
Do you remember, did he come back that Saturday or did he come back Sunday, if you remember?
I don't remember exactly, but I do remember seeing him after the fishing trip.
And it was right after he got back, is that correct?
I would say maybe a couple hours, and then I came over and seen him.
Okay. Now, was his hair pretty short back then?
Yes.
Did you notice anything about his head, anything unusual?
No.
Did you see any injuries, any bruising, abrasions to his head?
No.
Did you continue to stay in your relationship with him through May of 2016?
Yes.
Okay. And did your relationship continue, this romantic relationship, in June and July and August of 2016?
Yes.
Did you still see him pretty much every day or stay in contact with him very regularly?
Yes.
Okay. And then you were aware he was arrested in September of 2016, is that right?
Mm-hmm. And yeah.
Okay. Up until the time of his arrest, at any point in time, did he indicate to you that something unusual had happened before he went on that fishing trip to Racine?
No.
Did he ever discuss with you a homicide that had happened off Hoffman Road of a young young mother, did that subject ever come up with him?
No.
Just gonna have her idea. I am going to ask if you could tell me, is Mr. Burch the person that you had been seeing? And let me rephrase that. Are you still in a relationship with Mr. Burch?
No.
Mr. Burch, you were having the relationship back in 2016. Is he in the courtroom?
Yes.
Could you tell me what he's wearing and where he's seated, please?
And to the right, he's wearing a blue shirt.
I'd ask the record to reflect identification of the defendant.
Record will reflect that the witnesses identified the defendant in open court. Go ahead.
No further questions. Thank you.
All right. Cross-examination.
Hey, Jordan, just a few more questions for you, okay? When you were back in, I guess, May, June of 2016, were you aware that George bought some new shoes?
Yes.
Were you with him when he bought those shoes?
Yes.
You remember why he bought those shoes?
Because his other shoes were very bad.
What do you mean?
Like, they were dirty, there were holes in them. It just wasn't a good pair of shoes.
Did you make fun of him for him?
Yeah,
You think that might have had something to do with why he got new shoes?
probably.
Welcome back, everybody. We are expecting George Burch, the defendant in this case, the case we've been covering all this weekend, last week, to be taking the stand any minute now. We are carefully monitoring the courtroom feed. As soon as he goes on that stand, we are going to cover it. You do not want to miss anything because the defense's whole story wraps around the testimony of George Burch. Again, I'm here with Amy Dash. Amy, he's going to have a lot of explaining to do, and we talked about it kind of in the break. One of the big things that's weird about this case is that the crime happened outside of the house that she shared with Douglas Dietrich. The same house she lived with him, shared a child with. We know that her blood was found outside the house. I don't understand what they were doing out there.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. They apparently were out there for about 50 minutes, according to this data. We don't know how reliable it is, but it also placed him near the scene where her body was dumped and where her clothes were dumped, which was a separate place, right? So why would somebody who wants to kill, have sex with, then kill somebody, bring them to their house where the boyfriend is, and then dump them near the house as well? It seems bizarre. So in a sense, it does lend some support to the defense's theory that maybe this guy found her or they met at the bar and then he wanted to drive her home and perhaps they were doing something in the car and the boyfriend came out.
Now, we know that...
But that's really the only thing that supports that theory, right, for now.
Well, again, the defense is really pointing the finger at Douglas Dietrich. Again, we expect George Burch to take the stand any minute, and we do believe they're going to be pointing the finger at Douglas Dietrich. And the interesting thing about Douglas Dietrich is we saw the testimony yesterday from Dallas Kennedy, who was the babysitter, who was babysitting young Dylan when Nicole and Douglas were out on the night in question. They were going out. Now, I want you to listen very carefully to what she had to say, because it doesn't really match up with Douglas Dietrich's testimony. Take a look.
And he basically had stated that that was her body that they had found and that she had passed. And basically in conversation, I just asked, what happened? You know, like, what happened? And he just replied, I don't know, she hit her head and then she just wanted to walk home. She just wanted to walk home. Just in a conversation. It was just conversation between two people of just in shock. I asked if he was with family and that he should just be with his family right now, and if he needed anything, reach out later, but kind of grieve with your family.
So specifically, when you had asked him what happened, he said, I don't know, she hit her head, correct?
It came out of his mouth, that comment. I don't know what that meant, but it came out of his mouth.
And then what did you do?
It was just kind of silent, just taking everything all in. The conversation was short. It was pretty much ended after that. I think he just wanted to let me know that they found out the news that she's no longer with them.
pointing the finger at Douglas Dietrich. That's what we believe George Burch will do when he takes the stand. We are carefully monitoring the feed out of that Wisconsin courtroom. We expect him to take the stand any moment. The defendant taking the stand is a big deal. And Amy, you just heard it. You just heard it. The idea of pointing the finger at Douglas Dietrich, he said that Nicole got a hit on her head. He didn't say that in his testimony. And again, that's what she suffered. She suffered blunt force trauma to the head.
Yeah, I think that's weird because how would he know that so soon after? But I don't think that it outweighs all of the incriminating evidence that they already have against George Burch, right? They have DNA, they have data that places him at the scene of every single place where she was that night, her home, the place where the body was dumped, and then you have his truck that he was driving where apparently this murder may have taken place is stolen. It's destroyed. It can't be tested for DNA. How lucky for him.
Well, that's the thing. He's going to have a lot of explaining to do when he goes on the stand. A lot of questions that we're not entirely clear about, and I have to tell you, I'm sure the jury isn't very clear about either. So when George Burch takes the stand, and he will be taking the stand today, and as soon as we come back from this short commercial break, we believe he will be on the stand. You do not want to miss anything. This is the defense's entire theory. It's all resting in the hands of this one man. We are going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back into the courtroom. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. We are keeping a careful eye on the Wisconsin courtroom, the George Burch case, because he is going to take the stand today. We have been waiting for this since the beginning of this trial. Since the beginning of the time we heard about the defense's theory. The defense's theory that George Burch is not the one that killed Nicole Vanderheiden, a 31-year-old mother from Wisconsin. No, that he wasn't the one who did it. That it was Douglas Dietrich, Nicole's boyfriend. And you can only imagine what the story is that George is going to say. And what we know, but the jury doesn't know, is that George is going to say that he had a sexual relationship with Nicole that night outside of the house that she shared with Douglas Dietrich, and that he was knocked unconscious by Douglas, and when he woke up, Doug pointed a gun in his face and told him to dispose of the body that Doug had killed, He killed Nicole. This amazing story we can't wait to hear. So again, we are carefully monitoring the courtroom. As soon as we have a feed, we'll make sure to go to it, and you do not want to miss this testimony of the defendant. Again, I'm here with Amy Dash. Amy, we're waiting for the courtroom.
Yes.
Okay, we're hearing this happen, all right?
I can't wait to hear from this guy.
I can't wait to hear. How much do you think the prosecution is going to poke holes at his case, in the sense that, is it going to be the injuries? You didn't have any injuries to your head. What, did you cover them up? Or
Yeah.
how come you didn't tell anybody about how come, if this really happened, how come you didn't tell the police? What is it they really going to poke holes at with his story?
Well, those two things they're going to poke holes at, but they're also going to say, what evidence is there at all to support your story besides your testimony? You're getting up there and saying it. All the evidence points to the fact that you were involved, that you did this. But what evidence is there? There's no weapon that we found from Doug Dietrich that's got any type of blood on it from you. There's no eyewitnesses to say that they saw something like this happen. There are neighbors that were right next to the home. Wouldn't they have heard this commotion? But on the flip side, here's the thing. Really what this is going to come down to is how believable is this man? And how does he contrast with the testimony of Doug Dietrich? Because Doug Dietrich's testimony was not very compelling. He was not very emotional. And in fact, he was overly stoic, I felt, for the situation, because you have his girlfriend who was killed, the mother of his child, and he's not sad throughout the testimony, and he's very monotone.
Yeah.
So really all George Burch has to do is win over the jury more so than him, which is not a big hurdle.
Well, we're talking about reasonable doubt, and that's really what they're going to try to do when he comes onto the stand. And he has a lot of explaining to do, because they have not fought the fact that George Burch's DNA is all over Nicole. They haven't fought the fact that data from his cell phone points him to 4 locations that night, including where her body was found and the crime scene. As Amy said earlier, I believe he was outside of her home for 50 minutes. They're not refuting any of that, because it really falls in line with the story that I just presented to you, that he had sex with Nicole and that he was forced to get rid of her body at the hands of Doug, the real killer. What I want to play for you right now is, again, the testimony of Dallas Kennedy, the babysitter. Now, this is a little bit different. This is where she says she got really nervous and uncomfortable by the fact that Nicole didn't come home that night. And when you're pointing the finger at Douglas Dietrich, you can see how this was a good point for the defense. Let's listen in.
Thank you.
I'm going to sustain that last objection, so.
And Dallas, why did you decide to leave?
Because Nicole didn't come home. I didn't feel comfortable being there with her not being there, and I just wanted to get back, just wanted to get out of there.
And when you left, did you drive there?
Yes.
So what'd you do then?
I got into my car, locked the doors, just kind of looked around the cul-de-sac a little bit.
Why did you lock your doors?
I was just scared. I didn't think he would do anything. I was just scared. I don't know. Everything just seemed so odd in the evening.
Just a strange feeling.
Yeah, just wanted to go home.
All right, so that's Dallas Kennedy. She's doing pretty good on direct examination. Let's see how she did when she was cross-examined about her story. Take a look.
You had been out on Friday, May 20th of 2016 in the morning. You came over to the house, is that correct?
Correct.
And is it correct you had breakfast with Nikki?
Yes.
And that breakfast took place at her home, is that right?
Yes.
So you were at Berkeley. Did you drive over on that occasion?
Yes.
And when you drove over, you observed her car was parked in the garage, is that correct?
Yes.
And am I correct that the two of you then did some rummage sale shopping?
Yes.
Did you drive to that or did you walk around?
It was just in her neighborhood in the cul-de-sac area, so we just stayed there.
Okay. Was your vehicle in the driveway at that point in time?
Yes, on the left side of the driveway.
And how long would you say that you went rummage sale shopping?
I think we were together for maybe about 2.5 hours.
And is it correct at about 11 a.m. you were done and you returned to your vehicle?
Roughly, yes.
And did you leave at that point in time?
Shortly after, yes.
And Nikki went in to take a shower, is that right?
Yes.
Were you driving a silver Chevrolet Equinox at that point in time?
Yes.
But this was on Friday, May 20th at roughly 11 a.m. that you left, is that right?
Yes.
And that would be the morning when you finished the rummage sale shopping?
Yes.
Again, that's the testimony of Dallas Kennedy, the babysitter, in the case of George Burch. Now, we believe George Burch will take the stand any moment. We are waiting for that live feed. I am looking at the live feed right now. As soon as he comes on the stand, we're going to make sure to go to it, and you do not want to miss anything, because George Burch taking the stand is a huge, huge point in this case. Again, I'm here with Amy Dash. Amy, he's got a lot.
Because this is not typical. Right?
It's not typical, and he has a lot of explaining to do. Particularly, I want to focus now on the car he was driving that night, the Chevrolet Blazer that was loaned to him by the Jacksons, who he lived with. Now, that Blazer, which we believe he's going to say he drove Nicole's body in, fortunately couldn't collect any DNA.
Oh, it just happened to be stolen and set on fire.
Look, you can see
right after the crime.
That's a picture of the car right there. They couldn't get any DNA from it because it was in a hit and run and it was destroyed. Coincidence?
I think not, Jesse.
Okay.
But that's just my hypothesis.
And if people were to say, no, that's not fair, you know, that was a hit and run, it had nothing to do with it.
Anything is possible.
Okay.
But it's very strange that this would happen after a murder, so that coincidentally, the police cannot test this car for DNA.
Ironically, that hit and run is what led the police ultimately to his arrest for the death of Nicole Vanderheiden, because they searched his cell phone and they saw some evidence that was going to show that he was actually connected to the murder based upon where he was that night. They tracked his locations.
Yeah, that in combination with the DNA.
Right, right. It's an uphill battle for the defense in a way, but if you believe their story, it fits so nicely. That's what's interesting.
Yeah, it does. And I wonder, this is one of the things that I've really been wondering. We know that there was a fight between Doug and Nicole that night. When she hooked up with this guy, George Burch, because he doesn't deny that he was with her, did she say something to him about the discord in their relationship?
And why would that matter? Why would that
Because
matter?
is that how he came up with, well, maybe if I go to the house, I mean, maybe this was all pre-planned. If he wanted to have sex with her and wanted to kill her and knew that there was a problem with her and the boyfriend, well, there's an easy way out. I'll just go to the house, pretend I'm dropping her off. And again, this is all a theory. And then I'll blame it on the boyfriend because we know that there's problems anyway. I mean, how are you coming up with this theory unless it's true, unless the story is true that Doug came upon them and knocked him out and killed her? If that's not true, how is he coming up with such a specific theory that happened right outside of the house? And again, why is he driving right outside of her house to commit a murder if he knows that the boyfriend's inside?
Very interesting questions, and hopefully we get the answers when George Burch takes the stand today. We are waiting for that to happen any minute now. He is going to be taking the stand, and he better be coached, because he is being under cross-examination is never easy, but especially when you're the defendant. Amy,
I'm surprised, by the way, they didn't clean him up.
Well, what do you think about that? So we know he had shorter hair when this first happened, and the reason that's a problem for him, as many witnesses have said, he had no injuries to his head. So if he was knocked out by Douglas Dietrich, wouldn't he have had some injuries on his head? But now he has long hair, he has a beard.
Yeah, he does. And usually when they're trying to put somebody on the stand, they want them to play the role of somebody who is harmless, somebody who is clean cut. So what they would do is they would normally shave off his facial hair, cut his hair, put some nice clothes on him, maybe throw little glasses on him if they want that nerdy look, just to make him seem like he couldn't have done this.
He should look how Douglas Dietrich looked, in a suit, clean cut. Because if you're comparing Douglas Dietrich versus George Burch, which one looks more likely to do something? I hate to say it, but ladies and gentlemen, if you're going to say Douglas Dietrich, who weighs much less than George Burch and is smaller than George Burch, and you have to say that Douglas Dietrich knocked George Burch out?
Well, and this is just playing upon what traditionally has been found to be prejudices that jurors will have. I mean, there have been studies on these types of things about which types of defendants go over better with the jury. And so that's how they come up with the idea of how to clean them up and what they should look like before they testify. Gotcha.
Okay, so what I want to play for you right now, though, is the testimony of a Sergeant Roman Aronstein. He was a deputy sheriff. Now, this is a man who collected some items of evidence from the Dietrich home. And it's important for you to hear it because Nicole Vanderheiden suffered blunt force trauma to the head and strangulation. Listen to what he found at the home. Take a look.
The garage, from what you remember it?
It appears to be accurate. I believe there was a vehicle in the garage at one point in time, and then it was removed.
And there's multiple refrigerators, or maybe one refrigerator and one chest freezer?
I do see that, and I do recall looking in those areas.
And do you remember where specifically, or more specifically, you found the wires?
To the best of my recollection, I believe there was a box on top of the standing refrigerator, and I believe they were in that box. But that's to the best of my recollection.
Were there a lot of wires throughout the house?
I don't recall seeing a lot of wires throughout the house, no.
Why did wires stand out to you as being of evidentiary value?
I believe at this point in time it was made known to investigators that were assisting in the investigation that part of the cause of death involves strangulation, and that there may have been some wires that were located that were believed to be involved in the offense.
And then is it fair to say, do you remember that the first set of 3 was in a bundle and the second set of 3 was in a bundle?
To be fair, like I indicated earlier, I would have had a very brief interaction with these items, and then I would have pointed them out to others, and then I would have moved on, continuing with the search. I recall having examined those earlier with the defense counsel, and I do recall them to be in bundles. I have no reason to believe that they were in any other state at the time that they were located.
And with the first set of wires, did you measure them? Or did you observe a tape measure?
I observed the measurements conducted earlier today.
And roughly with that first set, do you remember how long they were?
All 3 of them were roughly between 36 to 37 inches.
And then do you remember, are they coated with something on the outside, those colors? Is that a rubber or latex coating?
I don't know what kind of material it is, but they do appear to be coated with a material that exhibits the colors that I earlier described.
And then is there an internal wire that you can see at the ends of those wires?
There appears to be, yes.
Welcome back, everybody. So we are waiting for George Burch to take the stand, the defendant taking the stand in his own trial and trying to explain why he's not the one who did it, but that it was Douglas Dietrich, the boyfriend of Nicole Vanderheiden. I'm here with Amy Dash. Amy, we were just hearing a little bit about the cords. So we know that Nicole was strangled to death. We know that, and blunt force trauma was the cause of death. Now, I believe that it was said that a cord was found outside of the home that had Burch's DNA on it, and that matched the cord or something that would be used to strangle her. So why does it matter that we're seeing these cords found in the house?
Well, that's what I'm wondering. I mean, like you said, there was a cord that was found that was consistent with the way that she was strangled, the marks on her that would indicate that she was strangled to death, okay? And there's Burch's DNA all over it. So how does that fit into his theory that Doug Dietrich knocked him out and killed her? If she was strangled and the cord has Burch's DNA on it, how does it fit into his theory? I would love to hear him explain that when he takes the stand. And also, why is it relevant that they found cords in the house if those cords don't match the cord that has Burch's DNA on it?
Isn't it all reasonable doubt, though? Isn't it all trying to show that Douglas Dietrich was the one who maybe did it? Because, again, as George Burch, we are waiting for him to take the stand. He is going to be pointing the finger at Douglas Dietrich. I would love to hear when he takes the stand if the interactions that he had with Douglas Dietrich. Imagine saying, this man that you see right there, that's Douglas Dietrich in the right in that photo, pointed a gun. A gun. Where did he get a gun from? He pointed a gun at George Burch and forced him to dispose of Nicole's body. I want to hear that testimony because we heard, and the jurors heard, Douglas Dietrich on the stand.
Yeah.
And
well, he did, I believe there was evidence that he did have some guns.
Yes,
Dietrich.
but what I'm saying is the testimony that he gave, Douglas Dietrich, we can kind of get a sense of his personality.
Yeah.
Will it match up to the same person that's described by George Burch?
I don't think so, but at the same time, he struck me as a weird person because he was not very emotional. He seemed very nonchalant about everything. So I think that goes against him. We have to see what is George Burch's composure. Is he nervous? And also, to your point about him being coached, how much has he been coached? Sometimes that can go against a defendant if they're coached too much because it comes off as inauthentic.
Right. So again, I am looking right now at a direct feed into the courtroom. The attorneys are having a meeting with the judge right now. They're talking about an issue because George Burch will be taking the stand, and you have to get all these preliminary issues out of the way first before the defendant takes the stand. And we love when this happens, Amy, because we've covered a lot of cases where the defendant takes the stand. Many times in self-defense cases, rarely does it work. Rarely does it work.
Yeah, I think if I were the defense attorney, I would say if the death penalty is on the table, I'm definitely putting my client on the stand. There's no question about it, because jurors are less likely to take a man's life when they have, or a woman, when they've heard the person and seen their emotions and seen that they're an actual living, breathing human being. Here in this case, like we said, he has to take the stand because he cannot even introduce his theory of defense unless he takes the stand. He wouldn't even be allowed because, first of all, there's not even evidence. So the whole theory is predicated on his testimony.
And are you anticipating also, again, we keep talking about it, the fact that there was nothing unusual about his behavior after the news report about Nicole came out? Why were you searching 68 times, but when somebody asks you about the case, you don't respond to it, you don't tell one single soul? I was held up at gunpoint and forced to dispose of this body, but he was afraid of getting, because he was on probation?
Yeah, and this is the risk of putting your client on the stand. Now he is open to cross-examination, where he's going to be questioned on so many things that he's going to have to explain, including, like you said, his bizarre behavior after, of him having no reaction when his friend, the person that he was living with, was saying that the person whoever killed her should be held accountable, and they're watching reports. The fact that he goes fishing the day after and sends a picture of him smiling catching a fish to his girlfriend.
Yeah.
And the fact that he is searching the internet for updates on the murder investigation.
What's interesting is he's not saying he had no connection to the crime. He's just saying he's not the one who did it. So either way you slice it, you said it before, either he's a cold-blooded killer sending fish, or if he's a guy...
or he's a sociopath.
Right, right. Now,
in some respects.
Amy, we are getting a report here that this is from Judge Zakowski, who's the presiding over the case right now. They are working through some issues. The state says that they're wondering whether they can ask Burch, when he's on the stand, whether he has been convicted of a crime, and the judge says Burch should answer yes. Again, the question about whether or not a defendant can admit that he was convicted of a crime, if you can explain to our viewers, why does that matter for the jury to know that?
Well, it matters if the crime, for example, is relevant
Right.
to the crime that we're talking about now, because maybe you can show some
Yeah.
sort of a pattern. But listen, they usually can't bring that stuff up
Yeah.
if they don't take the stand.
That's true, Amy.
He's opening himself up to all this.
And that's what we're waiting for. We're waiting for him to take the stand. But what I want to play for you is when Douglas Dietrich took the stand, because you tried to make an analysis of whether he did good on the stand as we wait for George Burch to take the stand. Let's listen in on how he did under cross-examination. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a live feed right now in the George Burch courtroom, and it's important because George Burch is about to take the stand. That's right. The defendant, the man who was charged with first-degree intentional homicide in connection with the death of 31-year-old Nicole Vanderheiden, he is about to take the stand and explain his story. And his story is that he didn't do it, but it was Douglas Dietrich, Nicole's boyfriend. We have a shot of the courtroom soon, and as soon as we do, we'll make sure to show it to you. You do not want to miss this testimony. I see him right now. He's on the stand. Okay, there he is. He is taking the stand. This is a huge, huge case. Let's listen in live.
Witnesses are the same, and the defense is in the middle of their case. The defense is going to call Mr. Burch at this time, ladies and gentlemen. As is normal protocol, the court had to ask some questions of Mr. Burch. This is why he's on the witness stand already at this time. And so you may formally call your witness, and then we'll swear him in at this time.
Judge, at this time, the defense calls George Stephen Burch to the stand.
Mr. Burch, if you stand, and Jody will swear you in.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Please state your full name and spell your last name.
George Stephen Burch, Jr., B-U-R-C-H.
Thank you.
Mr. Burch, the same reminder, the microphone's in front of you. Speak nice and clearly so the jury can hear you. And whenever you're ready, Attorney Stebbins.
Hey, George.
How you doing?
Good. You've been sitting here for a long time.
Yes, sir.
Probably have a lot you want to explain to the jury.
Yes, sir.
Let's start from the beginning.
Okay.
Where were you born?
Hampton, Virginia.
Hampton, Virginia?
Yes, sir.
Are there any other cities or names that Hampton, Virginia goes by?
Newport News.
Newport News?
Yes, sir.
And what part of the state of Virginia is that in?
It's the far southeast side of Virginia on the Atlantic Ocean side.
A lot of seafood down there?
Oh, yes, sir.
And what was your mom's name?
Sharon Diane Burch.
What did she do for a living?
She a beautician.
How about your dad? What was his name?
George Stephen Burch, Sr.
So you're the junior?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
No, I was the only child.
Okay. And those parents you just described, were those your biological parents?
No, sir. I was adopted when I was a week old.
Okay, so you've never actually met your biological parents?
No, sir.
And what did your dad do for a living?
He was head supervisor of an insurance firm.
So like a salesman, or?
He oversaw all the other salesmen also, but yes, essentially.
Mr. Burch, can you pull that microphone closer to you, a little right in front of you then? Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So going back to Hampton, Virginia, or Newport News, could you describe that community as you grew up in it?
Very family orientated, tight-knit community, sports.
Did you play sports?
Yes, sir.
What kind of sports did you play?
Football, basketball, and baseball.
And did you start that at a young age?
About 5.
Pretty young?
As soon as I could get on the field, pretty much.
Okay, the sports were big down there.
Yes, sir.
What about the size of Newport News or Hampton? Is it larger than Green Bay?
Yes, sir, definitely.
When you were a kid, how does that community compare to Green Bay, as you know Green Bay?
It was pretty much a lot like it is now here. Tight-knit, everybody's cares about everybody. Everybody into sports, back sports, high school sports, things like that.
So going back to just your family, did you guys have a house, or did you live in an apartment?
A house.
And that was officially within Hampton?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So was it just you, your mom, and your dad?
And my grandfather ended up living with us when he got sick.
Yeah. Okay. When was that?
I was probably about 3 or 4, I would guess, roughly. Pretty much my whole life there, he was around.
And was he working at that time or what?
No, he was retired. He had Alzheimer's, so my dad decided to take care of his father, and we all just helped.
Were you close with your grandfather?
Oh, yes, sir.
And what did he do prior to him getting sick?
He was a Mopar mechanic for 31 years.
Did you have other grandparents besides him?
Ones that lived away, yes.
Okay. How about aunts or uncles? Did you have a large extended family?
Somewhat, yes, sir. A lot of them traveled around. My grandfather was a preacher, and my one uncle was a missionary. He's been in Africa for like 30 years now.
So growing up, were you involved in, I guess, your grandfather's church? Was it your grandfather or your uncle?
Grandfather, yes, sir.
Okay. Do you have any family pets?
We had quite a few. We had dogs, and we had large exotic birds.
Like what?
African greys, blue macaws, blue front Amazons, cockatoos.
All at the same time?
Somewhat at times. It was almost like a jungle sometimes.
Okay. And you said you had dogs too?
Yes, sir.
What kind of dogs did you guys have?
My dad bred Rottweilers, and he also showed poodles.
What do you mean by showed poodles?
He dog competitions and stuff for people. He would groom them and would take them and show them.
So, as far as being a kid, you said you played sports for fun?
Yes, sir.
What else did you do for fun?
To hang out in the neighborhood, I guess pretty much sports was mainly a lot of things because where I'm from at 5 years old, you start playing sports, and that's, if there's a sport to play, normally you're in it. That's the big thing. We don't have a professional team, so it's big emphasis on local sports and colleges and things like that.
Now, I guess, is Hampton or Newport News, I know you said it's by the ocean, or is there
Right next to the Atlantic Ocean.
So there's a lot of water around that area?
Oh, yes, sir.
Did you go fishing a lot?
Growing up, every weekend that we could get out in a boat, we normally were on a Saturday or Sunday.
You said we?
It was always me, my grandfather, and my father.
And you would actually go out on the ocean?
Yes, sir.
What kind of fish do you catch?
Flounder, trout, croaker, all different types.
And has that kind of stayed with you throughout your life?
Yes, sir. I've pretty much enjoyed fishing my whole life.
As a kid, did you go to school?
Yes, sir.
Where'd you go to school?
Up until 4th grade, I went to a private school. Then after that, I ended up going to fundamental schools. It's a school where you have to be selected to go to the school. You can't just go to the school. And then I went to a public high school.
So you said you went to a private school, I guess kindergarten through, did you say 4th grade?
Yes, sir.
Is that how the schools are set up down there? Or?
It's K through 5, 6th through 8th, and then 9th through senior year.
Okay. So you went to the private school until 4th grade?
Yes, sir.
Then you said you went to a fundamental school?
It's pretty much a school. You can't just go there because you want to go there. You have to be selected to go to the schools.
And then you said you went to a public high school?
I went to Bethel High School.
Did you play sports throughout that whole time?
Yes, sir.
And again, what sports did you play?
Football, basketball, and baseball.
Okay. What was your favorite out of those?
Probably a tie between baseball and football.
What positions did you play in baseball?
Pitcher, third, and first.
Probably not at the same time?
No.
What did you play more often?
Pitcher and first.
Okay. Rotating innings or something like that?
Pretty much when I wasn't pitching, or you can only pitch a certain amount of innings. So when my innings were up, I would move to first.
And you also said you played football?
Yes, sir.
And which side of the ball did you play on?
Both. I played tight end for offense, and I started off at defensive end and moved to linebacker.
So those are positions usually occupied by bigger guys.
Yes, sir.
Would you consider yourself a bigger guy?
Larger than average.
Okay. You got any nicknames?
Big country.
When'd you get that nickname?
When I was 6 years old.
I guess while we're on that, do most of your friends call you George, or do they call you something else?
Most people call me Big Country. Like I said, I've had it growing up playing sports my whole life, and it's just always stuck. That's what the average person calls me. If not, they call me Steve. And if they call me Stevie, that means I've known him since I was real little.
Did you work in high school?
Yes, sir. I worked. My first actual job was when I was 8 years old. I got a gas can and a lawnmower for my 8th birthday.
Why don't you tell us more about that?
Me and my father had made a deal that anything I wanted, as long as I paid for half, that he would pay for the other half. So I cut out local lawns and things like that.
So your dad, you said, got you the lawnmower and the gas to get you started?
Yes, sir.
How old were you when you said you did that?
8.
And then did you say you cut kind of the lawns?
Neighborhood lawns, clean gutters, rake leaves, whatever needed to be done. I was a huge Michael Jordan fan at the time, and all his stuff was expensive. My dad didn't believe in paying more than $10 for a pair of jeans. So,
did your dad help you, or at least in the beginning when you were doing that stuff?
Yes, sir. My whole life growing up, he helped me.
Kind of showed you how to do that?
He taught me how to work, just to work hard and have a good work ethic.
You close with your dad?
My best friend.
So when you were in high school, were you still doing lawn care and landscaping?
Yes, sir.
Did you have any other jobs?
I started when I was 13 as a dishwasher in a restaurant.
What was the name of that restaurant?
There was 2 of them. They're right next door to each other. One was Sammy and Nick's, and one was Captain George's Seafood.
So when you say they're right next door to each other, is that like on a downtown area, or?
Where I lived, my house was 2 doors down from a main highway or main road, and they were on the main road.
And you said the first one was at Sammy and Nick's?
Sammy and Nick's, right. It was a Greek restaurant.
And what did you say you did there?
I would start off as a dishwasher. And after a couple months, I started paying more attention to the cooking aspects of everything, and they noticed I was paying attention and learning, and they ended up moving me to a cook.
And was that, I guess, how soon did that happen? Were you still 14 or?
14, roughly, yes, sir.
And the other restaurant, what was?
It was Captain George's. It was a prestigious, high-end seafood restaurant.
And what did you do there?
Started off dishwasher, ended up moving to a line cook.
And what exactly is a line cook?
Predominantly, as anything that needs to be done to get food out the window, honestly. It could be fries, salad, dessert, whatever needs to be done to sell the food.
And while you were working those 2 jobs, had you given up on the, I guess, personal lawn care business?
No, whenever there wasn't other things going on like sports or anything like that, I helped my father. We had a little side business we did when he wasn't working on the weekends.
Okay. So you were essentially in school, playing sports, and then working those jobs at the same time?
Yes, sir.
Now, you described the area you grew up in. It's fair to say you said it's kind of similar to how Green Bay is?
Yes, sir.
As you grew up, did that start to change?
Yes, sir, dramatically after a while.
What do you mean?
A lot of crime, drugs took over, things like that.
Did it continue to get worse as you got older?
It definitely escalated, worse and worse.
While we're kind of on that subject, George, have you ever been convicted of a crime?
Yes, sir.
How many times?
5.
Now, after high school, were you still working at Sam and Nick's, and I forget the name of the other one?
Captain George's?
Yeah. Were you
No, sir. I ended up working at other restaurants.
Which other restaurants?
TGI Fridays and Olive Garden.
What'd you do at Fridays?
Was a lead grill cook.
Yeah, so what does a grill cook do?
Pretty much prepares all the grilled meat and everything that would come off the grill area.
Okay. And what about at Olive Garden?
Saute cook.
So what's a saute cook do?
3/4 of Olive Garden's menu is saute. It's you make the sauce, you prepare everything that comes out. It's the guy you see sweating with all the burners and fire going everywhere with the saute pans.
Did you like that kind of work?
I actually love it.
Why is that?
It's a little bit of self-gratification. You get to see people's look when they get the food and try it and like it and things like that. And you keep busy, you're always doing something.
Were those your primary jobs after high school, or at least initially?
Yes, sir.
Have you been married?
Yes, sir.
What was the name of your wife?
Mary Elizabeth. She go by Beth.
Kind of an abbreviated
Yes, sir.
middle name. So when did you meet Beth?
I want to say it was around April of 2000.
And how did you meet her?
Her cousins were a longtime family friend of mine. I've known them since we were in like 5th grade. And she came to visit, come visit the family and ended up staying for a while.
And you said that was in, you think, around 2000?
It was in 2000. I want to say April or May at the latest.
So you had cousins in the area? Were you close with your cousins?
Yes,
Or, I'm sorry, were they your cousins or her
they
cousins?
were her cousins.
Okay. So your friends.
Right.
Her
Yeah, I
cousins.
grew up with them, went to school with them, played ball with them.
And at some point in around 2000, she came to Hampton, Newport.
She came to visit in January, February time period, roughly. And I ended up running into her at their house.
And you said she was visiting. Where was she visiting from?
She's originally from Newburgh, New York.
Did she come down with her family, or was it just her?
No, she came to visit and then ended up staying for quite a while. She liked it here. I think she kind of just wanted to get away from her parents for a little while.
Did you guys end up hitting it off?
Yes, sir.
So did you guys stay together in Virginia?
You're watching the live testimony of George Burch, the defendant in this murder case. Amy, why does it matter all of his background information?
Oh, because let the jurors envision little boy George in his religious community, fishing and playing sports. The more he can talk about his innocent, loving, warm community that he grew up in, his private school education, well, then people can relate with him and sympathize with him. And why would they want to convict him? And could he be capable of killing if he's so soft-spoken the way that he is? But the convictions, Jesse, are a problem. 5 is a lot.
5 is a lot. Let's listen back in to George Burch.
Parents lived in New York?
Yes, sir.
So you agreed to, I guess, go back to New York, be closer to her family?
But right, based pretty much for us to start our life somewhere different, I guess.
And why did you guys want to start your life somewhere different?
Where I'm from was rapidly getting worse. We didn't see it as a perfect place to raise a child. If we decided to go that route, it was a lot of violence and things were going on. People were getting shot and things stabbed and like that all the time.
What is all the time?
Pretty much almost every day you'd see it in the news. Someone was getting stabbed or shot.
So you guys decided to move to, was it Newburgh?
Newburgh, New York, yes, sir. It's about 40 minutes north of New York City.
Did you know anything about Newburgh before you moved there?
Not a single thing.
Did she, I guess, have to do some convincing to get you to move there?
She kind of baited me, I guess the best way to put it, because her family lives on one of the most prestigious bass fishing lakes in New York.
And what lake is that?
It's Orange Lake.
And what kind of fishing did you know happened in Orange Lake?
A lot of bass fishing, largemouth, smallmouth. The best part about it was that it was not open to the public, so just anyone couldn't come. You actually had to live on the lake or have lake rights through a family to even touch the water.
And her family lived on that lake?
Yes, sir.
So you agreed to go to New York with her?
Yes, sir.
In part motivated by the potential fishing opportunities?
Right.
So did you guys move in with her parents?
No, we got our own apartment.
Was that close to her parents?
about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes away roughly. It's in the same city.
Had you met her parents prior to moving there?
No, sir.
So she came back from Virginia with you, I guess?
Yeah, they laid down a couple hurdles, but yes, sir.
Did you have a job lined up when you moved to New York?
No, sir.
And I know you said you didn't really know the area. Did you know anybody there?
Just her.
And her family? Well, you didn't know her.
I hadn't even met her family when I got there.
Did she have a job lined up?
Yeah, she was a waitress, a server.
So you said you guys had an apartment?
Yes, sir.
You pre-planned that?
Well, we'd saved money and everything for the move and pre-planned it when we moved there. We had already put the down payment on the apartment and everything before we moved in.
Once you got there, did you end up finding a job?
I'd say within not even the first week, roughly, I found a job.
Found a job doing what?
Construction, drywall, metal framing.
Had you worked in construction beforehand?
I had never worked with drywall, metal framing before in my life.
So did you get hired as what position, I guess, were you hired for?
I guess the best way to put it would be laborer, entry level.
Were you working full-time at that point?
Yes, sir.
Was your wife working full-time at that point?
Yes, sir.
And again, you said she was a server?
Yes.
What was the name of the company that you worked construction for?
Fryer Drywall.
And did you work there basically the entire time you were in New York?
Predominantly, yes, sir. There was off seasons. Snow would get so bad that the trucks couldn't deliver equipment to the job sites or things like that, and ended up working for a huge family car dealership.
Did you say?
Salesman.
As a salesman, okay. And with the construction company, did you remain a laborer?
No. Moved up the ranks pretty fast.
Into, I guess, what type of position?
Foreman.
And what does a foreman do?
Pretty much oversees the jobs when the boss can't be there, or oversees the crew to make sure the work's getting done in an adequate time frame.
Now, I think you said that you guys got married in New York. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Was that pretty soon upon getting there?
We were there about a year.
Traditional type wedding?
Yes, sir.
And did you guys end up having kids together?
Yes, we did.
Was that long after you were married?
The first one came about a little under a year.
And was that a boy or girl?
Boy.
Well, what's his name?
Tyler Steven.
Okay. And did you have more kids together?
We had another boy.
And what's his name?
Colin Dominic.
And how old are they now?
Tyler just turned 16 and Colin just turned 13.
Are you close with them?
Yes, very.
Welcome back, everybody. This is George Burch giving live testimony right now in his own murder case. Again, he's charged with the murder of Nicole Vanderheide, and you're hearing him take the stand. It's just beginning. Amy, you're looking at this. You're seeing him. I think he's coming off pretty well.
He is, and he's coming off better, in my opinion, than Doug Dietrich, because he's relaxed. And he expands. It's almost as if he has nothing to hide. He's talking about all the details of his upbringing with fond memories. And by the way, Jesse, you sure you want to call him George and not Big Country?
I know. Let's listen back into Big Country as he goes over his work experience and his relationship with his wife and family. Let's listen in.
Okay. And what did her dad own a construction company?
Yes, sir.
Separate from the one you were working for?
Yes, sir.
So as you guys were having kids, did you both remain working?
Yes. Her mother ended offered her services to watch her grandson.
Okay, so her mom kind of helped raise the kids?
Yes, sir.
Not allowed you guys to keep working?
Yes, sir. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I know you said you didn't know anybody when you moved to New York, but I assume you started to meet people?
Yes, sir.
Was one of those people Ed Jackson?
Yes, it was.
How'd you meet Ed?
Through one of my coworkers at the drywall company. We happened to be talking about fishing, and he was talking about how he had a buddy he'd go fishing with, and he asked me if I wanted to tag along with him. And we all ended up going out on a Saturday morning, going fishing.
Did you guys, and I guess how long had you been living in New York before you met Ed?
Roughly about a year.
You said you met through a coworker?
Yes, sir.
Did you and you went fishing together?
Yes, sir.
Was that on this prestigious lake?
No, that wasn't until later when they found out I had access.
Okay, tell me more about that.
We had went fishing this one lake you could walk up in and walk across the rocks and waterfalls. That's where we originally went fishing. And I, talking to people in general about fishing, had scouted areas that you could get into. And I ended up taking them not to Orange Lake, but to another secluded lake that was huge for bass fishing.
And you said you had known about that lake?
Yes.
And they didn't?
No, sir.
Did a lot of people know about that?
No, it's the old apple orchard. You had to, one, know where the trail was, and two, you had to have a four-wheel drive vehicle that you didn't mind getting scratches on to get to.
And did you have that kind of
Yes,
vehicle?
sir. I had a Jeep.
Okay. Now, you said you met Ed through your coworkers. Was it you and your coworkers and Ed that kind of always went fishing together?
It was, originally it was me, my coworker, and Ed. And then, for the most part, it was normally me and Ed almost every weekend. And his son would tag along every once in a while.
So you guys spent a lot of time together?
Yes, sir.
Was Ed married at that point?
No. No, sir.
We heard from Linda Jackson earlier. Was Linda there with him?
No, sir.
Okay. So as you and your wife were raising your family, did there end up being some bumps in the road?
Yes, sir. We married very young, or got together very young, so we were kind of working our way through the marriage and figuring out, which way to go, because we really didn't have anything else to compare it to.
Were her parents, I guess, involved in the relationship?
Somewhat, yes, sir.
After you had children, you were still working construction, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did Beth find a different line of work?
Yeah, we had spoke about long-term goals, what we plan on getting out of life, where we want to end up at the end of our life together, or hopefully still together. And we spoke about, I had actually seen that FedEx was hiring seasonal, and this was around September, October. And if they liked your performance, they would hire you on permanently. And it's a really good job to have, career.
So did she apply for that?
Yes,
job?
and she got hired on. She worked the season through Christmas, and they offered her a full-time position.
Eventually, did you and your family leave New York?
Yes, sir.
And where did you leave New York for?
There had been some issues with my father and his medical issues, and he was getting really bad off, and I'm my only child. So I talked to her about it, and she understood the whole thing, and with her job, she could transfer. And she put in to make sure she could get a transfer back to Hampton, Newport News area, and they said they would grant her a transfer. So we ended up moving back so I could help take care of my father.
Was your father still married to your mother at that point?
No, sir.
Were they divorced?
Yes, sir.
When did that happen?
When I was like 10, roughly.
So it was while you were living in New York that you got wind that your father's health was?
Yes, sir. And I didn't want to be far away in case something happened. I couldn't get to him.
Had he been sick before then?
small problems, nothing huge. But then he was born with an enlarged heart, and pretty much his heart was shutting down.
And so your mother wasn't really in the picture helping him at that point?
No, sir.
Where was he living?
He had his own little apartment.
So you discussed the situation with Beth and decided to move back to Virginia?
Yes, sir. She completely understood.
And did you say she was able to transfer her job?
Yes, sir.
The kids came with you?
Yes, sir.
Did you move in with your dad?
No, sir. We moved reasonably close. I could get to him within a matter of probably 3 minutes if I needed to.
So was that an apartment or a house that you
Moved to a house.
Did you have that prearranged prior to moving back to Virginia?
Yes, sir. We already had the already established, and we had already paid the move-in fee and everything before we even got there. We moved right into the house. As soon as we came to Virginia, pulled right in the driveway and loaded the truck.
And obviously, Beth had that FedEx job. Did you have a job lined up?
Yes, sir.
What job was that?
It was a window installation and caulking company. It installs windows and industrial windows and things like that.
And how did you have that lined up prior to moving there?
It was a deacon from my dad's church he went to, and he'd known me for a long time, and my dad had made it aware that I was going to be moving back, and he wanted to know if I had found an employment yet.
Was that a full-time job?
Yes, sir.
And was Beth's FedEx job still full-time?
Oh, yes, sir.
Were your kids in school?
Yes, sir.
And you said the primary, or one of the reasons you went there was to help care for your father?
Yes, sir.
Is that what you did?
Yes, sir.
I guess, what did you have to do, or what?
There's a lot of things he couldn't do, like lifting or moving things. He was on oxygen 24 hours a day. So I pretty much helped him with the cleaning of his house. Anything he needed he couldn't do, or worried about that he couldn't do, I'd help him with.
And did he recover from his sickness?
Somewhat. He was always on a lot of medications. He always had to go to doctors a lot. He stayed on oxygen 24 hours a day until the day he died.
And again, once you moved back to Virginia, were you very involved, I guess, with your mom at that point?
Not really.
Focused on your dad?
He's always been my best friend.
And also your own family?
Yes, sir.
And you said he ended up passing away?
Yes, sir.
When was that?
September 6th, I believe it was 2014.
Were you still married at that time?
Yes, sir.
And then after that time, I guess, would you say your relationship with Beth, I guess, continued to deteriorate?
Yes, sir.
And eventually divorce paperwork was filed?
Roughly about a year later.
How'd your kids handle that?
It hurt them. But it got to the point where we had made a promise that if we were arguing and we were doing it in front of the kids, we didn't want them to grow up seeing that.
Eventually then, did they kind of understand the situation?
We talked to them about it. They were getting up, and we've always been very straightforward with our kids, very open and honest with them. we try not to sugarcoat things if we don't have to. We can be honest with them. We keep it that way.
And you guys were living in that house.
Yes, sir.
Did one of you move out of that house?
She ended up moving in with her parents and taking the kids.
So her parents, did she go back to New York?
No, they probably, I want to say about 3 years, 2 or 3 years after we moved back to Virginia, they ended up moving down here. They missed the grandkids. Well, that's the excuse they used.
So they moved, and were you guys again in the kind of the Hampton, Newport News area?
Yes, sir.
And that's because that's where your dad was?
Yes, sir.
So you remained in the house that you had with Beth and the kids?
For a while.
Were you still working at that point?
Yes, sir.
And was that through that window company you talked about earlier?
No. I worked for the window company for a little while, and I ended up getting back into working in restaurants.
Was that like TGI Fridays again, or?
I worked for Olive Garden for a while, and then I ended up becoming a sous chef for a 4-star restaurant.
What was the name of that restaurant?
It's Thomas Schlesinger's. It's a prestigious steakhouse. They have one in Virginia and one in New York.
You said you were a sous chef?
Yes, sir.
So what's a sous chef?
Pretty much I was the person underneath the head chef. I made sure everything he said got taken care of.
And again, you like that kind of work?
I love it.
While you were in Virginia, did you maintain contact with Ed Jackson?
Yes, sir. I talked to him probably a minimum of every 2 weeks, probably.
In the beginning?
Pretty much the whole time.
Okay. And was he in New York?
About a year after I moved back to Virginia, he moved to Green Bay, where his mother's from here.
And you knew that because you had been communicating with him?
Yes, sir.
And how were you communicating with him?
Phone, text message.
So he, I guess, was living in Green Bay for a period of time before I guess you and your wife split up.
Yes, sir.
And you'd been communicating with him about, I guess, how his life was going?
Yes, sir. He always told me I'd like it here. Kept trying to sell me to come visit. But the only vacation we got, we always went on like cruises or something.
Did he ever visit you in Virginia?
No, sir.
And I guess, when did you first know of Linda Jackson?
I knew he was dating her, but didn't physically ever speak to her or know her directly until about a week before I moved here.
So I know you said that Ed was kind of filling you in on how his life was going up here. Did you keep him informed of what was going on with you?
Yes, sir.
Did you kind of fall on, I guess, some difficult times after the split?
Yes, sir. And Ed was always, after my dad passed away, he was like the only person I could really talk to. He's older, so he's more the father figure. That's why we got along. He reminded me a lot of my dad.
So eventually you decided you were going to get a fresh start?
Yes, sir.
And I guess, what made you want to get out of, I guess, that area?
Growing up there my whole life, honestly wasn't too many places I could go that didn't remind me of my dad. That and just my marriage, just everything seemed to overwhelm me there for a little while.
What did you know about Wisconsin before you came here?
Packers. Like to drink beer, and cheese. That's honestly about all I knew.
So all the stereotypes?
I'd say yes.
Okay. Did you know anyone besides Ed living here?
No, sir.
And eventually you and Ed, I guess, worked out arrangements for you to come to the Green Bay area?
Yes, sir.
What arrangements did you guys make?
Pretty much come here and get away and find my bearings and decide what I want to do.
How'd you get here?
Train. 27-hour train ride.
What route did that train travel?
I got on the train at like 6 o'clock Sunday morning in Newport News, Virginia. Went through D.C., had a layover there. Then we ended up ending in Chicago.
Who paid for that train ticket?
I believe Ed did, but it was one of Ed or Linda.
And so the train stopped in Chicago?
Yes, sir.
Was Ed there waiting for you?
Pretty much, yes, sir.
So you guys had arranged basically for the train to take you to Chicago, and then Ed was going to pick you up in Chicago?
Yes, sir.
And he did pick you up in Chicago?
Yes, sir.
And as far as dates and stuff go, to your best of your knowledge, when was it that you actually came, or you got to Chicago?
I got on the bus. I mean, on the train. Sorry. It was February. I'd say it was February 28th. If I'm not mistaken. I know I arrived here March 1st.
So is March 1st what you think is the day that you got off the train in Chicago?
This is, I want to say like 9 o'clock, 9:30 a.m.
Was Linda there?
No, sir.
Just Ed?
Yes, sir.
He drove you did he drive you directly from Chicago back to Green Bay?
No, we stopped in Racine. He had, they're called waypoints. It's pretty much for a fish finder. It pinpoints places where you've had good catches the day before, and he had to drop them off to his buddy that owned a fishing charter.
And you were with him when he did that?
Yes, sir.
So you met his buddy?
Yes, sir.
And do you remember what his name was?
Mike, I don't remember his last name.
And you say he owned his own, I guess, charter company?
It was A1 Charters. It's a fishing charter.
Did you stay at Mike's at that point?
No, we were only there for roughly about an hour.
You guys introduced yourselves to each other?
Yes, sir.
Did you, obviously you and Ed had fished a lot together prior to this. Did you guys discuss potential for any sort of upcoming fishing trips?
We had spoke about 2 months later, roughly, we were going to go on a fishing with Mike's boat out in, I believe it's Lake Michigan.
But you didn't go fishing at that point?
No, sir.
So after you stopped at Mike's, did you continue your drive to Green Bay?
Yes, sir. Stopped at McDonald's and then came to Green Bay.
And who was driving?
Ed was.
And what kind of vehicle was he driving?
Chevy 3500 HD.
So a truck?
Yes, sir.
I know you said you went to McDonald's, but then from there, did Ed bring you directly to his home?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall the address of that home?
912 South Greenwood. I believe it's Avenue.
And that's that's Ed's house?
Yes, sir.
And you knew at that point that he was living there with Linda?
They made me aware of it. She wasn't there when I got there.
But she knew you were going to be coming?
Yes, sir.
You guys had made arrangements for you to stay with them?
Yes, sir.
And I think you said when you arrived at that residence, Linda wasn't actually there.
No, she was still at work.
Do you recall around what time you made it to Green Bay?
It was afternoon, roughly 1 o'clock, maybe 1:30, somewhere around there.
So you get to Ed's place, and I guess what do you guys do once you get there?
Came inside, introduced me to the dogs, introduced me to his father. I didn't even know his father lived there. I just called him Mr. Jackson. I don't remember what his first name was. And he showed me where my room would be. Carried my stuff to my room.
What were the dogs' names?
Zeke and Athena. I mean, Zeus and Athena, I'm sorry, was a German Shepherd. He actually passed away about a month after me being there. He had a heart attack. And he had a huge Doberman named Athena.
So, the two dogs, Ed, Linda, and Mr. Jackson.
Yes, sir.
Did you say you had your own bedroom?
Yes, sir.
Could you just, I guess, briefly describe how this house is set up, how it's laid out?
From the street, you walk in, and it's, I guess, a mud room, what you call it. And then you go in through the main door. When you go into the main door, you can go left, and it's the living room, dining room, kitchen, bathroom, and there's a bedroom right there in like the dining room area, and that's where his father stayed because he couldn't climb the stairs. And then on the other side, you go, as soon as you come through the door, you go to the right, it's stairs that go right up. My bedroom was the first door on the left, and then there was an office, and then it was Ed and Linda's bedroom.
So Mr. Jackson, Ed's father, he had his own bedroom.
Yes, sir.
You had your own bedroom?
Yes, sir.
And then Ed and Linda shared a bedroom?
Yes, sir.
And then your bedroom and Ed and Linda's, those two bedrooms were on the second floor?
Yes, sir. And there was an office in between.
Did you bring a lot of stuff with you when you came here?
Not really. Pretty much they have only certain things you can carry on a train. Bought some clothes, 2 pair of work shoes, and a pair of Jordans.
When you say a pair of Jordans, what are those?
Tennis shoes.
So they had a bed, I guess, set up for you?
They told me they'd have all that. I'll just bring my clothes and bring myself.
And I think you said you first arrived at that residence and got the tour and showed your room sometime in the afternoon?
Yes, sir.
What happened after you were, I guess, shown the residence? What did you guys do?
They told me he had some things he had to take care of, and told me I pretty much went and passed out in my room for a while because it wasn't that easy to get any sleep on the train with a lot of people moving around and bumping into you. It didn't fit too well in the seats either, so that didn't help.
Judge, may we briefly approach?
Sure.
All right, you are watching the live testimony of George Burch, the defendant in his own murder trial, taking the stand. And it's a lot of background details right now about where he grew up and how he ended up really where he is right now. Again, I'm here with Amy Dash. Amy, I know a lot of these details are not of interest to the jury, but some of them are important, especially talking about the Jordans. Now, we know the Air Jordans that he had, these tennis shoes, were examined because they might have left an imprint on the back of Nicole Vander Heiden's neck. But for our viewers right there, how important is all this testimony?
I think it's overkill. I think they're going way too much on his background. It's been going on for, what, more than 20 minutes now. In the beginning, it was important to establish that this is a man, it's a person. You had him crying over the loss of his father. You want the jurors to sympathize with him. We want to humanize him. But when you talk about every single step of his life, every single place where he worked, I think it's a little bit much. I don't see the relevance. Let's get to the night of the killing.
Well, let's not forget, he did tear up when talking about his father, who he described as his best friend. Now, as somebody who's on trial for the murder of a beautiful young woman, Nicole Vanderheiden, 31 years old. She was a mother herself. Talking about his father and saying how that was his best friend, and he started to cry, makes him a little bit human.
That was compelling. That was a little bit brilliant on their part, because I think in advance they knew that was something that was going to get him to cry. And that's why they zeroed in on it, because why else would they bring it up? It's got no relevance to the case.
Amy, let's listen back in. George Burch is on the stand.
Please to stop at this time and to have your lunch break. We'll reconvene at 1:15 and continue with the testimony of Mr. Burch. We'll see you then.
All rise.
All right, everybody. So they're going to lunch break right now. Again, George Burch has taken the stand, the defendant in his own murder case.
Big country.
Big country, as he's been described. That's right. We're here again with Amy Dash. Big country. And we talked about some of the details. He really is becoming a human in the eyes of the jury. Hearing about his background is so important. And we really did start from the beginning, where he was born, what his parents were like. He had jobs. He developed a very close relationship with his father, but he had problems in his marriage. But people can relate to a lot of that.
Yeah, and what did I say to you with 30 seconds into his testimony?
You said, I like him already.
I like this guy.
Yeah.
And I didn't like him before he got on the stand. That's why I'm a big proponent of putting your client on the stand. Most defense attorneys would disagree with me. But I think that if somebody can be humanized, if somebody can talk about things they did that maybe the jurors can relate to, maybe they're sitting there listening to him saying he went to church and he went fishing, and there's a juror who also grew up in a small religious community who's like, that sounds like me. That sounds like my upbringing. All of a sudden, you can't help but like this guy if you can relate to him.
It's interesting because we talk about celebrities, right? We talk about celebrities, how they're just like you and me. They're just like everybody else. In a way, he's the celebrity of this case. He's the main star. Everybody's waiting for him to speak. And when you hear him talk about these certain details, he does become like everybody else. He has hobbies. He's everything like that. What the conversation is about to move into is the night in question.
Yeah,
how do you think he's going to handle that part of it?
I think he will stay consistent. And when you talk about celebrity, I mean, really, he's more like a villain in this case. And what this is doing is it's counteracting that preconceived notion. It's making him seem like your average guy. He was a chef. He worked at Olive Garden. He enjoyed watching people enjoy their food. And
that's an interesting point. He enjoyed watching people eat his food in a way. He was happy to make them happy. Now, the defense attorney coached him. Right. They knew they were going to get that testimony from him.
I think so, but he doesn't come off contrived.
No.
He really does come off very relaxed. A lot of times when people are coached, they're nervous because they're trying to remember what they were told and they want to say the right thing. He seems like he could just talk all day. I think someone in one of our chat rooms was saying, wow, if he is convicted, he'll be a great conversationalist in prison, because you feel like you could sit down to a cup of coffee and talk with this guy.
Yeah.
Very different from Doug Dietrich, who was colder, he was shorter, and he seemed a lot more nervous.
Exactly, and that's what we're doing. We're comparing the testimony of two people, a man who's on trial and a man who the defense is claiming is the actual killer here. And if you just take it from the beginning part, he seems a little bit more relatable than Doug Dietrich.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when we get to the night of the killing, he's going to have to explain things. And what was interesting, Jesse, is that his defense attorney brought up the convictions first. They wanted to get ahead of that. He said, he just kind of threw it in there. Oh, how many times have you been convicted? 5 times. That throws you off a little bit either way, because you're all of a sudden you're like getting endeared to this guy, and then he's got 5 convictions. You're like, wait a second, maybe he's not the nice guy that he appears to be.
They kind of buried that in a little bit.
Yeah,
buried it in.
but he'll have to explain it.
They'll have to explain it. Amy, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
Amy's going to be taking over. Again, we are signing off here on Crime and Investigation. Thank you for joining us. Again, we'll be back on Monday at 9 a.m. We have 2 big cases we're covering, the George Burch one as well as the Tex MacGyver one we're going to talk about as well. So we thank you so much for joining us here on Crime and Investigation. But you can continue to watch the George Burch case today on lawandcrime.com. Amy's going to cover it. You're not going to want to miss anything. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.